Right, good morning, everybody. Very warm welcome to yet another webinar brought to you by Saiosh. We've had a tremendous response to this particular webinar. More than 1,500 persons has registered for this webinar this morning. I see the Zoom room is already chock and block full, and the rest of the persons are viewing it on our YouTube channel. It just shows you the interest in this webinar that we're bringing to you this morning with the Chief Inspector that's going to unpack the new direction, which has an impact on every single occupational health and safety professional in this country and their employers. My name is Niels Nortje. I am the CEO of Saiosh. Saiosh is the South African Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, a SACWA recognized professional body for occupational safety and health to register health and safety practitioners professionally in South Africa. We have 3 professional designations registered on the NQF, namely technical member, graduate member, and chartered member. Currently, Saiosh has more than 16,500 members, making it the largest of its kind in Africa and one of the largest professional bodies of all professional bodies in South Africa. Just some housekeeping announcements before we start this very important webinar presentation. Please feel free to use the chat box to chat, to meet and greet and say hi and identify where you're from. We can see the names are streaming in there, and welcome to all of you, and especially our members, Saiosh members, because I know we have a lot of visitors on this webinar today as well, and welcome to you guys as well. Right, very important announcement, Q&A. We anticipate a large number of questions to be posed to the Chief Inspector. We have actually appointed a facilitator that's going to monitor the questions and collate them, Sean Chester, which is one of our chartered members with Saiosh. Some ground rules or some house rules regarding the Q&A. First of all, we will not accommodate or field or allow any questions which is not related to this new direction that's going to be presented this morning. There is simply no time to do so. Secondly, we will also not consider the question unless at the time, or sorry, let me rephrase that. We will not be able to consider the question before it hasn't been dealt with by the presenter. For example, please don't go and ask any questions now on clause 15 or clause 17, because we're simply not going to be able to accommodate them. Those questions will be cleared out. Please wait for the Chief Inspector to deal with that section. He assured me that he will be very clear and thorough and explain. So the likelihood that your question will be answered during the presentation is there. So please follow that ground rules. If you don't mind, only ask questions pertaining to this direction of this presentation this morning. And please only field the question after the presenter has dealt with that section. It's very important. Otherwise, we're not going to cope, and we're going to have you can imagine a lecture room with over 1,000 persons in the lecture room, and everyone is just shouting questions. So, but it is open, so please feel free to post your questions. From the chat box point of view, you're welcome to chat any or put any comments there. If you have any technical difficulties, our membership and communications manager, Gareth, is in the background. He will assist you with any sound quality or video quality. At this stage, I can report that our systems show 100% video transmission and 100% sound. So that should all be good for now. Just another announcement, this webinar, as with all Saiosh webinars, will be recorded, and the recording and the presentation will be made available to all our members. It will be emailed to you directly to your email address. It will also be available on our website by tomorrow. It will also be available on our Facebook page, and it will also be available on our YouTube. In fact, it is YouTube channel. In fact, it's been live broadcasted on a YouTube channel right now. Also from a CPD point of view, just to remind all our members that this webinar is Saiosh CPD verified with 2 CPD points. Members, you can go afterwards and claim 2 CPD points for attending this webinar from your profile. If you're not sure how to do that, simply go to our professional registration page. On the drop-down tab, you will see CPD. It will tell you exactly how to do it. All professionally registered Saiosh members should know how to do CPD, as it is linked to your professional registration. Right, I think that's all that I need to inform you about the presentation this morning. I think at this stage, before I introduce him, if I can ask Mr. Thibault Zana, if you can share your camera and your sound with us so that we can get you on screen before you actually start sharing your presentation. I would just like to introduce you. Good morning, Mr. Zana, and welcome. Thank you very much. We know you've got a busy schedule, and we really appreciate your time this morning to so shortly after these directions have been published by the Minister to put a presentation together for our members. We really appreciate your attendance here this morning. So just to refresh your memory then, we have secured Thibault Zana, the Chief Inspector of the Department of Employment and Labour, to unpack this new direction on the OHS COVID-19 that was published by the Minister of Department of Employment and Labour, signed on the 28th of September, but actually published on the 1st of October. Thibault, we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you very much. As I said, we will guard you in the sense, not really from a question point of view, but all relevant questions will be posted afterwards, and we really appreciate your time this morning. If I can hand over to you now, sir, if you could please share your screen with your presentation, and please have a good one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nokia, to you and Saiosh. I do appreciate it. And good morning to the chairperson as well of this particular webinar. Of course, the Department of Employment and Labour always appreciates the opportunity to interact with its clients. But Mr. Nokia, thank you, and let's get down to the reason why the people have joined. Thank you to everyone who has joined this webinar, and we do appreciate the time that you've afforded us, both in your homes and at your workplaces, for this webinar. And I think there are some key things that we'll look at today. The presentation is made up of really 3 parts. The first part will deal with some, and I'm just going to skim over it, historical information. Then we'll get down to the presentation and statistics, as you'll see in the content at the moment.
Sorry, Thibault, if you can hear me, can you maybe just open your presentation in presentation view? Thank you.
Thank you. So as I've indicated the content, then the last part will deal with the statistics. I was humoring myself with the part, thank you for inviting me into your house, as well as into your workplace. Prepare a bit of coffee for me there. But the department doesn't allow us to drink coffee with the clients anymore. So thank you anyway. As we get into it, you'll recall there was a first direction, the second direction, and now we are on the third direction. Mr. Nokia was saying early on, it's like a movie in parts. So we'll touch on all 3 of them, but the first 2 very briefly. Of course, you know why the this direction is in place. I'm not going to go into that, but I think what you should be aware of, without a doubt, is that both the direction is in place, and the current regulations, such as the regulations for hazardous biological agents, as well as the other regulations and the Act, is still in force. It has not been replaced or surpassed by this direction. However, the direction does contain very, very pertinent information, which has allowed it to go down to the nth degree in terms of assisting you to understand what is required. So the Occupational Health and Safety Act then is still applicable. This direction does not suspend any of the obligations of the employer in terms of the OHS legislation, nor prevent the implementation of more stringent measures. So if your risk assessment says do more than is in the direction or the Act and regulations, then go ahead and do that, for obviously in the interest of the workers. So I thought I'll just lay the legal framework down for the current time that we're in, albeit that we're in level 1 when this was published for your interest. So The OHS legislation, then you'll remember section 8, and I've covered this and I'll cover this always. I will remind you why the legislation's there. The OHS legislation requires the employer to provide and maintain. It's not just about putting it in place, it is about maintaining, as far as is reasonably practicable, a working environment that is safe and without risk for the health of workers, and to take those steps that may be reasonably practicable to either remove or to lessen the hazard, and you can see I put it in red, the potential hazard of whatever's at the workplace, and that is quite important for you to take cognizance of. So I'm asking some of the more senior people just to bear with me in relation to setting this framework, because there could be newer people in our industry that need to just hear me set the groundwork for this particular presentation. So this is why I'm going to a bit more detail than usual. So the first direction, you know that it applied under certain conditions, and I'm not going to go into that list. I've given you a timeline as I've done the last time, again for the newer ones. And then you'll know the first direction, 29 April, second direction, 4th of June, and the last one that we've just had published on the 1st of October. And the reason why it took so long is there were some issues that both the employer and the employee representatives were haggling about and needed to come to an agreement, which then we all agreed on the final document. Now, I need to make an indication to you, having gone through the document, that is a document, there are some errors in that document that I've seen. I'm not going to go into why they're there or who's responsible or whatever. I think suffice it to say that there's a need for a newer one to be put out to correct some of the errors that currently exists in the current one. So just be aware that in working through it, again, I've picked up that there are still issues, but that's not for today. I'm just highlighting that so that you're aware that I'm aware of those issues. Again, more for historical purposes, 20 years from now, someone may do a bit of research and pick up on this particular slide and see where they can get information around this matter. You'll remember that when the Spanish flu came out in round about 1918, very, very few people took cognizance of that up until we were struck with this pandemic. However, if you go and look at information available on the 1918 pandemic, there's quite a bit. So this one, no doubt, there will be a lot of research available later on around how we dealt with this particular pandemic. NEDLAG, this document basically had to be signed off by NEDLAG. So any further directions that could come out will have to go through NEDLAG before it is published. Now, the third direction, what is in it that is so key, and I've only included or extracted just 3 issues, but there are a couple more. Time off changes from 14 to 10 and 7 days and even less. Unsafe workplaces now requires the input of an inspector, that is an OHS inspector. There is a change from the requirements placed on the 500, which now applies to employers, and we'll see whether or not that's a typo. Already there's been a question under the Q&A around this matter. Is it a typo? We'll see about that later. Mr. Nokia, we'll touch this one later. So there are other issues which I'll touch on as we go through the presentation. So I thought I'll keep a bit of mysteriousness to this with the 500 issue. Okay, so inspections in the past was pretty clear. Everything was new, despite there being a pandemic. When the first OHS Act came out, in the country. That is the health and safety non-mining, because non-mining was already running and established. But in 1918, there was no inspectorate in the non-mining sector. The inspectors that were put into place came from the mining side, and our first act in the non-mining side came out in 1918. We are on the fourth one at the moment. The 1993 one is the fourth one, and the review is currently the fifth one, which we are waiting to come out. So you know about it. There was a shortage of PPE and everything else, and you'll remember that even after the PPE issue was sorted out, employers were still locking workers in, and employers were still not complying. And there was a reason found for why there was non-compliance. And you'll recall I've been mentioning now the fact that non-compliance hasn't changed at all. So the new direction then emphasizes things as we are well entrenched in this particular disease. What is it that we need to do right now? So we are established what is it that is key, and you'll see some of those things come out during the course of the presentation that we are going to do. Most of what we're going to do then is talk about what is it that is so critical that we needed to bring out another direction. Why could we not have just stuck with the first direction? So in this one, you'll see that I'm talking about 7,000 inspections and the compliance rate of 58% with 500 new OHS inspectors joining us. You have an inspectorate now that has a lot more experience, except for the 500, of course, but there is definitely more experience than when we started. The inspections that are conducted now, which I'll touch on later on, is more than just about COVID, but we'll have a look at the detail. So the purpose of the directive then remains, it is to stipulate measures that must be taken by employers to protect the health and safety of workers and members of the public who enter their workplaces or are exposed to their working activities. Now, this is quite an important issue, and if you're failing to manage, and you'll see that come out strongly, the COVID issue at your workplace, you as an employer, you could be having a major problem on your hands. How does that pan out? We'll have a look at that. Every direction up until now addressed two key issues: the transmission by an infected person to both workers, colleagues, as well as to members of the public, and also vice versa. So just how different, the question is, how different are the measures that we apply at the workplace to what we are applying at home, or to what we experience when we go out and do, for example, shopping at another workplace. So that becomes quite important. If we are not managing this aspect, and I'm sure that you've experienced it, there are employers out there who are not doing what is required in terms of this direction. And I don't need to tell you how serious that is, or the implications on you as a person with regard to COVID. So there are sector-specific measures which we'll touch on later on as well. Very, very briefly, I just want to bring to your attention, the sector guidelines are to supplement the directives that have come out. So every single guideline that comes out is going to be or guideline rather, is going to supplement the directive that comes out. The directive does not reduce the existing obligations of the employee in terms of OSHA, and nor does it prevent an employer from implementing more stringent measures. So always there's the minimum, and you have to determine what is it that is required over and above what the directions or the guidelines require. So far, we'll look at that detail just now. Period of application, of course, it is in force until the lockdown is finished unless otherwise determined, but these things are in place up until it's withdrawn officially. As indicated, I'm not going to go into this. This is just for you. Subject now, the application of this and the relevance for the third direction is that was published on 1 October is then it is subject to subdirection 2. These directions apply to employers and workers in workplaces who are permitted to continue or to commence operations under the regulations. So if there were any other employers that were not part of the setup yet up until until level 1, and they were to come on stream now, they would need to comply with this. Or any other employer that starts up a business must now comply with this as well. I thought it pertinent to indicate where it does not apply. This direction does not apply to a workplace excluded from OSHA in terms of section 1.3 or 1 sub 3 of OSHA. And the reason for that, forget about the 3 after the OHSA 3, that is a footnote 3. And the reason for that is that it refers to merchant shipping and the South African Maritime Safety Authority, amongst other things. So that aspect, there was never a promulgation in regard to that. However, anything to do with the maritime side will fall under some side, or the South African Maritime Safety Authority. Of course, you know that this direction is in place unless it is superseded by a direction brought out by a specific department. Let's say Department of Transport, they brought out one, then their one will apply under those circumstances. That is the exclusion for this direction, in respect of which another minister has issued a direction under the regulations dealing with health and safety of employees, and subject to the employer's obligations under OSHA to conduct a risk assessment. Employees with less than 10 employees need only apply the measures set out in these directions. So you'll see that there is something in that regard. I left in the definition of vulnerable employee. It is in the second direction, of course, but it's also in the third direction. And where we touch on that, of course, we'll look at it now. What I've included here in this presentation is basically an extract of the third direction. To some extent, I have included most of what is written, and in some of the directions, I've actually only included really a component to an extract, because those things you can read up yourself. You don't need me to read off everything. I've included what I thought was pertinent or relevant. So now that we've got that done, I think without a doubt, one of the most important directions in this document is the one that refers to the risk assessment, and there's a reason why. And this one we'll always go over in detail. Every employer must undertake a risk assessment to give effect to the minimum measures required by these directions, taking into account the specific circumstances of the workplace. And that is very important. And that is why you cannot copy and paste from one workplace or from one business into another without factoring in the differences that exist and the requirements of the OSHA regulations for the hazardous biological agents. As you know, this one was out for public comment, and you do well to provide input into that. I think it is still out, if I'm not mistaken. So here you have a risk assessment that is done, you have it on file, and you keep it on file, and you do nothing else with it. And that is so hunky-dory. And we are going to be so happy as inspectors that you haven't done anything, because now we have to write out a notice that says you have contravened this direction because you haven't taken it further. Now, what does it mean taking it further? Under B, on the basis of that risk assessment, develop a plan. So you've got the risk assessment, now you develop a plan outlining the protective measures in place for the phased return of its employees before opening. Now, it's not only on that conditions that you have it, but you'll recall also that this applies to both new businesses as well as old businesses that have been given permission to start up and continue with their operations. So this plan is quite crucial, and we want to see that you've included COVID. Please don't brush over this aspect because it's one of the key issues that we will look at and we'll drive this. It tells us whether or not you understand what it is that you're doing around health and safety when you have this aspect in place. Consult on the risk assessment plan, and if you have any plan in place and the risk assessment in place, and you have not discussed that with your workers, you may as well throw it in the bin because it's going to be worth nothing. We will, of course, ask, have you consulted on this? And it's going to be quite key. Communication. You'll remember the London Olympics, and during the London Olympics, when they went back and they went to go and see why did they have the success in health and safety that they had, they came away and said there were two key aspects, amongst others, of course, but two of them was leadership and communication. Leadership at the time of crisis is very important, or in a time of crisis is very, very critical, as is communication. So you take this particular document has been published on 1 October, and Saiosh has seen the need to ensure that its members are fully informed, as well as others who have an interest in it. And a big plus for them on that, in that this communication is taking place and you are being made aware of what is being set up there. So the other thing, of course, that I want to bring to your attention here, which you'll see I've raised later on, is this whole issue around health and safety committees, health and safety representatives, or employer representatives. Now, probably one of the biggest problem, and a couple of weeks ago, I sat aghast in a meeting when they were talking about setting up committees in order to deal with the COVID issue. Now, why did I sit aghast? Because it told me in the organizations, the size of which we were discussing, if they did not realize that the health and safety committee was key already in terms of the structures required by the Act, then we have got serious problems on our hands. And if this is not the case, that the employers discussing issues with the health and safety committee or the health and safety representatives, or even the employee representatives, then we are sitting with a serious problem in this country. And it also tells me why we are sitting with anything from 40 to 58 plus compliance rates in different sectors in our country. So yeah, if I had to tell you anything else, probably one of the most critical things is that this slide is most crucial for me. If you don't have structure in health and safety in a company, then you are sitting with a major problem. So I'm emphasizing, re-emphasizing, and I'm asking you to make this your takeaway in terms of what we are discussing. The health and safety reps, health and safety committees, no structure, problem, failure in your, or flaws in your health and safety management system, amongst many other things that will happen. You'll see a string of errors happening without your health, without anything being done, and chaos and subsequent catastrophic accidents taking place because structures don't work. make that plan available for inspection by an inspector. Now, one of the things that I drive home for the inspectors, of course, is wherever it says that the employer must make it available to you as an inspector, it does not matter if that document is in your house, in your car, on the moon, whatever. If it's not on that at that workplace for the inspector, you have failed to comply with this. It must be available on site where the inspector will be doing the inspection at all times. It mustn't be with the accountant. It mustn't be with a bookkeeper. It mustn't be with your consultant. It must be on site. That's where we want to see it. And it's a contravention not to have it, because the regulation or the direction is very, very clear in terms of what is required. So then the plan referred to in subdirection 1B must include, and you can go through that. I'm not going to go through it. Suffice it to say, anything that is missing in this list will become an issue that must be dealt with. Maybe let me just raise the issue of identify the vulnerable employees. That becomes an important issue. If you haven't gone about identifying it, you are going to sit with the problem. However, there are issues that have been raised over the last several months around this, and we'll touch on that. Again, this is a continuation of that. You know what, I wasn't going to go through it, but let me quickly do it. The plan then referred to in subdirection, in that subdirection must contain the following. If it's not there, it's a contravention. The date that the workplace will open and the hours of opening. A list of employees permitted to return to work and those who are required to work from home. A plan and timetable for the phased in. Identify the vulnerable employees and ways of minimizing the number of workers at the workplace at any one time. Workplace protective measures required and to be taken in terms of this direction, and then the measures for the daily screening of employees and of clients and contractors and so on at the workplace. Details of COVID-19 compliance officer appointed in terms of direction 4F. Now, this does find itself in several areas, and it must be adequately dealt with by yourself. Why do we want this compliance officer? And it is there in the direction that this person plays an important role in making sure that things are dealt with. Whatever the measures are that must be put in place, this person must make sure that the employer is complying. So again, structuring health and safety important, having the right people in place is important, and this person hopefully will take the load off others by making sure that things are done. Now, while I hear people appointing these people, compliance officers, I have yet to receive a telephone call from one compliance officer who says to me they'd like advice on X, Y, and Z in regard to their workplace. Because I can tell you now there are problems they're experiencing and they are not necessarily raising it. If they are, then I'll be happy with regard to that. And they are getting the kind of responses they should. So compliance officer important, and then obviously it talks to the appointment of a manager, and there's a good reason for that. Why manager? Someone senior enough in the organization to assist with managing what is required so that things do get done. A procedure then to resolve any issue that may arise from from the exercise by an employee of the right to refuse work. Now, this particular issue, I put it in red for you because I wanted to emphasize this thing that you need to have a procedure, and we'll cover this right to refuse work and the changes that have been brought about in the third direction, that you must make sure you update your procedure in this regard. So procedure then must be in place. It must be clearly set out as to how things are going to be dealt with when an employee refuses to continue working at the workplace. Failure to have this procedure in place could be problematic to resolve any issue that may arise from the exercise by an employee of the right to refuse work. And we'll cover that in some detail. You'll see that in a couple of minutes. A procedure, make a note of that. You're required to have one in place, and you must, with this direction, update it, and I'll tell you why. So then, let's get to the first thing, and the first question, I think that was on your Q&A. Every employer must establish the following administrative measures. If the employer employs more than how many employees? It is 50 employees, 50, 50. There's no typo, there's no mistake. It has been changed. And there was a challenge in this regard. This was one of the reasons why there was such a delay on bringing this direction out. But it was eventually agreed to when the procedure to be used by the employer was agreed to, and it was not whittled down, but it had only the relevant information that had to be submitted by the employer. So there was recognition to change it from 500 to 50 for all employees. Then the employer component indicated that's not going to be possible, especially if it had to be submitted every day. There would be a major challenge. So this 1 year, you can put there 50, and there's no typo at all with this particular subdirection. If the employer employs more than 50 employees, that employer must submit a record of its risk assessment together with a written policy concerning the protection of the health and safety of its employees from COVID-19 as contemplated in section 1 of OHS. Now the question here was, if we have already submitted in terms of 500, then must we submit with regard to the 50? And the answer is, if you have submitted for the 500 and everything has been taken care of in that regard, then my response is going to be no. And if you want me to send you a letter in that regard, then send me an email and I'll have to then respond to that particular matter. So you do have a situation here where this might create a bit of a problem. However, the inspectors will be informed. They have already been given a copy of this document, and they also get training in regard to the directions that come out. As contemplated in section 1 of OHS 2, its Health and Safety Committee established in terms of section 19. So you have to make sure that your documents find its way to the Health and Safety Committee. And of course, I'm saying to communicate to your different groupings, your health and safety reps, committees, and your employees for reasons that are pretty obvious. Include them in your health and safety. I think the times where we've excluded them and therefore don't get full compliance is because we continue to leave employees on the sidelines as if they are what do they call these guys? Substitute players and not the main players in the field. And it's time that we made them main players with regard to their own health and safety and hold them accountable for that in terms of section 14 as well. So the Department of Employment and Labour, within 21 days of commencement of this direction, again, ignore the 4. It is just a footnote 4. But another issue that was raised in your Q&A, isn't this too short from the 21st of, from the 1st of October, you have 21 days because it is from the time of publication of the Gazette. And the response to that is that that is a time frame that is required. And if you need an extension, contact your local Department of Employment and Labour inspectors and request an extension of this, or because it's a deviation of the regulation, as it were, you have to request a deviation from our office if you need a deviation, unless you feel you can comply within 21 days. Now, my take on this issue is that most companies have this in place anyway. Of course, all you have to do is make sure that you are including COVID, because in some instances, COVID is not included in your documentation and so on. So this is where you find the non-compliance is coming in. It must require employees to disclose whether they have any of the health issues, comorbidities, or conditions contemplated in the definition of vulnerable employees, and thereafter take special measures to mitigate or lessen the risk of COVID-19 for those employees in accordance with the Department of Health guidelines to facilitate their safe return to work or their working from home. Now, there is a thing called teleworking, and we will, of course, develop something around that. But what I'd like to add in here, and there is quite a bit of documentation around teleworking as referred to in some countries, or working from home as we refer to it. Now, I'm with you on the issue that has been raised around some employees not wanting to reveal their medical issues to the employer. However, those workers must be made to understand that where they choose to do that, they are obviously penalizing themselves, because the employer cannot take the necessary precautionary measures that they should be taking under the conditions. Of course, it's easy. Comorbidities includes being morbidly obese and so on. You can say tongue-in-cheek that that's easier to see at your workplace, and that will affect quite a few of the workers at the workplace. In that instance, of course, I'm not raising it as a humorous issue. I'm raising it more as a concern that workers choose not to reveal medical related issues for a variety of reasons. Those reasons, of course, are theirs, and it does impact, again, as I said a moment ago, it does impact on the employer's ability to take the necessary precautionary measure. Now, the impact of that, of course, is, let's say you are suffering from dizzy spells, or you have high blood or hypertension, or you may suffer from also what is known as low blood pressure, and you do have problems, but you don't want to reveal that to the employer. It doesn't only affect you, it does affect those around you as well. So if you were to suffer from COVID and the comorbidities issue was to come into play, and it affects others around you, that could be taken quite seriously during an investigation by the Department of Employment and Labour. Of course, it will also go to the compensation fund, because our relationship as inspectors with the compensation fund is now hand in glove. We no longer work separately. We work together, and our reports find its way to the compensation fund. That in terms of the investigations and also the inspections that we do. So things have changed. This is not a threat to the workers who don't want to reveal their current medical status. However, it is rather a cautionary note that it impacts on more than just the worker, him or herself, but it does affect those around you. And in terms of Section 14, you do have a responsibility in terms of the Act as an employee within your organization. I was required or requested last night to respond to a question like this, and having considered it, I take this matter up quite seriously. But yeah, we'll deal with that as it comes along. It must notify all workers of the contents of these directions and the manner in which it intends to implement it. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring this to your attention again. Communication, health and safety is not a secret. It is not something that should be put into a shelf, onto a shelf or into a drawer, and so on and so on. So you need to be aware of the implications of not communicating things. Section 13, of course, does deal with the issue of communication in the Act. But not only communicating, you have to make sure that the worker is conversant. And if you look at the definition of conversant, it is quite clear what the intention is, that the worker must understand what it is you're trying to communicate in relation to health and safety. I said to you that there were a couple of errors in the document, and D is absent from the direction that you have, and hence me making a note so that you don't wonder if D decided to jump off the page. D is very much absent from this direction, but it's something that I'll make sure that it gets fixed by whoever is required to do so. E, it must notify its employees that if they are sick or have symptoms associated with COVID-19, that they must not come to work. Now, there are still employers that are allowing workers to come to work. Now, I understand, of course, it might be a key employee and so on and so on. However, the direction and even the Act itself is quite clear that protection of myself as well as those of relating to others around me is quite important, and therefore I need to make sure that I as an employee comply with this. The employee, of course, must take paid sick leave, and as per many questions I get, in a number of instances, workers have already used up their sick leave, they've used up their annual leave, and then they try to take on the TERS in terms of UIF. And once that is all done, of course, what you have to rely on, except the goodness of the employer in relation to paying you if you're not at work. So and some of the times, of course, I've had a situation where some people are claiming to have fallen sick on numerous occasions, and of course that could become a problem for the employer, also in relation to sick leave and time off, and so on and so on. So manage this and manage it very carefully. It's not a game that you as an employee must play with the employer, or the employer must dangle a stick in front of you as an employee to try and get you to work. Look, sick is sick, but you'll see later on something that comes up in the direction in relation to having COVID. And it's something that I'll share with you in a couple of minutes. This particular subdirection here becomes quite important as well. So you've seen me put there red light, ICU, and there's a very good reason around that. I have emphasized the appointment of a manager early on as a compliance officer. Imagine they were to take the tea lady or the gardener and appoint them as a compliance officer, and workers are not going to adhere to what the employer is trying to put in place. So this should be, as far as I'm concerned, and I've preached it accordingly, a senior person in the organization. Put a junior in place. Your system is not going to work. Let me write. I'll write you a letter saying to you that you're wasting your time and resources if you do that. So what is the compliance officer required to do? Early on, I said to you, I'll tell you what this person must do. And this becomes quite crucial in terms of the duties of such a person. oversee the implementation of the plan that was referred to earlier. So that implementation becomes crucial in terms of other managers in the organization, making sure that they comply with. And I would imagine that this person reports to the highest level in the organization, and non-compliance should be dealt with in a very serious way. Oversee the adherence to the health and safety measures established in the workplace to give effect to the requirements of this direction, including appointing employees to perform this function if the employer has more than one workplace. So take note of this, please. This one gives you clear direction on how to perform what needs to be done here. And then the third one, is to address employees or workplace representative concerns and to keep them informed. Now, you can see the emphasis on communication is key, just as leadership is key. And imagine if your leader is not complying with what is required in terms of the direction or the legislation, and that is happening out there based on the number of complaints I get from workers themselves. Address employee or workplace representative concerns and to keep them informed, and in any workplace in which a health and safety committee has been elected, consult with that committee on the nature of the hazard in the workplace and the measures that need to be taken. So the message, as far as I'm concerned, and this is the only thing that changes health and safety in the workplace, as well as the culture in your workplace, begins with communication at all levels, It is not a worker responsibility only. It is not a manager responsibility only. It's not the CEO's responsibility only. It's not the Department of Employment and Labor's responsibility or the consultant's responsibility. I remember going to one company, and I've been to many, and I can give you the stories. Get to one company, a consultant is there to meet us. Talk to the consultant, and I can see, I was there with a number of inspectors, and I can see that the consultant is not on the same page in relation to health and safety. That is very, very dangerous, very dangerous. I immediately stopped the meeting and said to them, get the consultant, not take the consultant out, get the employer's representatives. I want senior managers here, or the CEO, I want them there, or the inspection comes to a halt. And I then subpoena the CEO and the senior managers to my office as an inspector. Don't put juniors or allow juniors to meet with the inspector, or consultants only to meet with the inspectors. That is going to create a problem for you going forward, because I've told inspectors to demand senior managers or even the CEO to be present. Health and safety is not a game. People die, expensive equipment is damaged, and so, and property and so on is damaged because employers fail to take health and safety as seriously as they should. And I'm not talking about everyone, I'm talking about senior managers, including boards of companies, not taking health and safety serious to the extent that it should. It's not even considering it as part of the agenda items that they have. That is how serious this matter is. So please make sure that this matter is adequately dealt with, because inspectors are going to be requesting this, and I'm going to make sure that this matter gets enforced to the degree that it should. Otherwise, CEOs are going to find themselves visiting the offices of the department more often than they would like to. I've called this one falling flat. Don't go and look for the heading, either ICU or falling flat in the direction it's not there. But I've raised it earlier and I'm going to raise it again. Later on in the direction, you see this come up. It must ensure that the measures required by this direction and its risk assessment plan are strictly complied with through monitoring and supervision. So if you are not doing this, I'm talking about your system falls flat. Flaws develop in your health and safety management system. You will have an accident, guaranteed, no questions asked. You will be sitting with a problem. So it must ensure that the measures required by this direction and its risk assessment plan are strictly complied with through monitoring and supervision. So if your supervisors also are not playing a role and it's all left to one person, forget it. Health and safety is a team game, just like rugby or soccer. You only win if it's the team that's playing and not one individual. That is the way it is. You can do what you want to. Go research successful safety management systems in companies or companies that are successful, and you'll see that that is the case. It must, as far as practicable, minimize the number of workers at the workplace. So if we are in the second wave and this, the number of workers you have at the workplace and you don't have everything that you need in place, and the only way you can manage COVID at your workplace is by reducing your numbers, then do that. The first one that you're going to remove are those suffering from COVID comorbidities who have reported it to you. And then you will look at your risk assessment and determine who else is at high risk and make sure that they are properly or adequately catered for. And then also do what you are required to do at the workplace where the rest of the workers are. It must, as far as is practicable, minimize the number of workers at the workplace at any given time through rotation, staggered working hours, shift systems, remote working arrangements, or working from home, teleworking as it appears in some countries, or similar measures in order to achieve social distancing as contemplated and to limit congestion in, amongst other places, public transport and at the workplace and so on. So choose the right things to do in order to make sure that this virus is properly dealt with and that your workers are safeguarded as far as is possible. It must take measures to minimize contact between workers and members of the public and the other way around. Now, there's some things, as I said to you earlier, I'm just going to leave it for you to deal with. So this is one of them. It must provide workers with information that raises awareness in any form of manner, including where reasonably practicable, and you can choose it. And the things that you must talk to, there is more than enough information available, and information is freely available on the net for you to be able to use. However, you must communicate it to your employees and not say, oh, they can read it up on the net. Oh, there's more than enough information available. They can do it. They can. My talk is to those of you that can make a difference in your workplace by making sure that everyone around you is informed. Why? Because if they are not informed around you, then you will become infected and affected by them to the extent that it could cost you your life. So play your part, but play a part that's bigger than just you, for those around you as well. Now, here's an important one that you must take note of. If a worker has been diagnosed with COVID-19, it must inform the NIOH in accordance with the National Department of Health guidelines, either directly or through an employers association. And they talk to you about that in a moment again. If you have tested positive, then you must also inform the compensation commissioner of your test and so on and so on. Obviously, there will be the first report and everything else that you're required to do. Follow what they are saying you must in the compensation commissioner what do you call this, direction that has been issued as well. So you can in fact be properly considered. If you refuse to, the compensation commissioner will not consider your claim. Again, that 8 that you see there is a footnote 8. Forget about that. You can look at it in your own time. 3, Roman 3, investigate the mode of exposure, including any control failure, and review its risk assessment to ensure that the necessary controls and PPE requirements are in place. Again, I'm talking to the converted here in terms of what you know you should be doing. Investigate the mode of exposure. How did you get infected? Was it workplace related? Was it at home? Where did you get infected? Have a look at if the infection was at work, where's the failure? What took place that created a situation for the infection to take place, given that you've supplied everything and every worker is doing everything that is required, from sanitizing to disinfecting your workplace and so on and so on and so on. So if someone is becoming infected at the workplace, it is due to a failure or flaw in your systems, guaranteed. Otherwise, they picked up the infection at home or in the community itself. Determine the need to temporarily close the affected work area for decontamination using an incident-based risk assessment with due regard to the Department of Health's guidelines after consultation with the Health and Safety Committee. Now, there is documentation to this effect. You can read it up on your own. But one thing I want to draw, I put it in red for you. This thing where we close businesses and so on, I think that must come to an end now unless the employer's got nothing in place. If an employer's got nothing in place, or only has some things in place and not everything, especially the critical things like, for example, sanitizing your hands is not an option. Having soap and obviously access to water, clean running water, becomes crucial. You rather want to wash your hands with soap and water than sanitize all the time. Obviously, there are those amongst us who may suffer from dermatitis, amongst other things, or might develop a rash due to the type of sanitizers that are being used out there. And there's some scary stuff being used out there that these employers are allowing to be put on your hands. The other part, of course, is decontamination. Now, here's my rationale that I've explained more than once already before. You have someone who's infected in an area. Remember the requirement, every employee is sanitizing throughout the day. Your work area, you're required to disinfect throughout the day from the time that you start work to the time that you leave work. Your ventilation system is working optimally, and so on and so on. So now my question is, you get to hear someone is sick, and of course it depends whether or not the person is in an open office, a closed office. They access many points, they don't access many points. Your general work areas are decontaminated throughout the day by those responsible for it. Do you still need to close your workplace? And I will argue this point. I'll argue the point, and the reason for that is if you're doing everything that is required, decontaminate the area where the person is then working, because everywhere else it should be clean and clear. But of course, there are many other things that must be factored in that forms part of your investigation to see why someone got tested positive at the workplace. If they tested positive at the workplace, you have a bigger problem as opposed to someone coming from outside into the workplace and now they tell you that they are infected. Now, if someone comes in, one of your workers, or even a let's say a client or contractor, and they say to you, oh, they are positive, they're COVID positive, there's the door. You immediately show them to the correct waiting area until you are able to remove them from the workplace to the correct facilities, except in the case of a client or a contractor, of course. But your own workers, make sure that they are properly dealt with and that you have procedures in place that assist your workers. Try and treat this as humanely as possible, please. You are dealing with human beings, of course, and my expectation is that you'll do the right thing. So just to revisit this point then, determine the need to temporarily close the affected work area for decontamination using that process after consultation with the Health and Safety Committee, if there is one, or with the Health and Safety Rep. Now again, get your structures involved. They must assist the employer in managing this thing. The employer is not going off and sitting on its own without directly including the Health and Safety Committee or the Health and Safety reps. They must be involved. This is not a managerial thing alone where you're sitting in an office and your committee is not involved. You can sit with your managers if you like, but you cannot do it to the exclusion of the safety committee or representatives' involvement, as well as other representatives that may be that may form an important part of your workforce. Give administrative support. This is the employer, of course, giving administrative support to any contact tracing measures implemented by the Department of Health. We do not get involved in this part. Please do not involve us in your contact tracing as a Department of Employment and Labor. In addition to the duties listed in the subdirection, an employer who employs more than 50 employees in a workplace. Take note here now, please. There's a change here. In a workplace. And this was one of those areas that was heavily debated. In a workplace, must submit the following categories of data to the NIH in the manner set out in the National Department of Health guidelines. So if you have 50, more than 50 in a workplace, then you must do the following. Submit the following categories of data to the NIH in a manner set out in the National Department of Health guidelines. Now, please, colleagues, during the Q&A time, go to these documents that are included with links, and the Department of Health indicated they've updated their links. Go to their links and try and look through these documents that have been updated, and it should be working because they've given us the assurance that it is. And read it for yourself. And at some stage, the NIOH and I will request request Saiosh to allow us to address you again around some of the things of the Department of Health, both the NIH as an entity of the Department of Health, as well as the NICD, which we'll touch on in a couple of minutes as well. So this one is not 50 in the country if you're an employer. It says if you have a workplace and you have more than 50 there, then that workplace must do the following. Be clear on that, please, and make sure that you do comply with this. Each employee's vulnerability status for serious outcomes of a COVID-19 infection details of the COVID-19 screening of employees who are symptomatic, details of employees who test positive in terms of a positive laboratory test for the COVID-19 virus, the number of employees identified as high-risk contacts within the workplace of a worker has been confirmed as being positive, and details on the post-infection outcomes of those testing positive, including the return to work assessment outcome. So take note of the issues that are now required of you to report, and this is very, very important. We are going to touch on the time frame in a moment. Must submit the data referred to in paragraph A once in respect of each employee status contemplated in that subparagraph as soon as possible. And here is the big issue. And this is where the employers and the employees representatives got stuck. However, if you're looking very carefully, you are going to see that why there was agreement in the end to this whole thing and why the changes. So as soon as possible before Tuesday of each week, in respect of the data referred to in subparagraphs 2 to 5. Subparagraphs 2 to 5. Now 2 to 5 says details of the COVID-19. So 1, you do not need to report because there was a requirement for you to report that on the one occasion. However, on a weekly basis from 2 to 5 as listed there, you are required to report. So as soon as possible before Tuesday of each week, in respect of the data referred to in subparagraphs 2, Roman 2 to 5 for the previous calendar week commencing on Sunday. Again, I'm going to revisit that slide. 2 to 5 is from this one to that one. That is what you must report on weekly in terms of what this is requesting. Now, take note, it's not everyone. You were only required to do that in Roman numeral B1. You were only required to do that. However, over here, you are required to do more. Must inform its employees of the submission made in terms of subdirection A and advise them of its adherence to the POPI Act. So that is the Protection of Personal Information Act. And you cannot just do whatever you want to do. You have to make sure that your employees are on board and that you're keeping the communication flow open to your employees. Please make sure that you are communicating. I say to you today, on the 8th of October, that communication can turn around your workplace as one of the primary sources of getting the type of change that you want. Leadership is another one. And then obviously issues that influence culture at the workplace are other things. Now, allay your workers' fears. As long as you have fears in the workplace with regard to various aspects, or you just have a culture where fear is in existence at your workplace, then health and safety, wave it goodbye. I guarantee you that you will not have a successful health and safety at your workplace when people are standing around nervous and working in such a way that they are totally psyched up. But that's a discussion for another day. May submit that data to an employer association. Remember, I said to you earlier that there's reference to this. Here it is. You may submit your data that we just did to an employer association if the association has entered into an agreement with the NIOH to receive, process, and submit the data to the Institute. If you do not have an agreement, you are required to do it yourself. Do not submit your data there through your association to the NIH unless there's an agreement in place. Otherwise, you as an employer you are still required to do it unless this agreement is in place. Undertaken to submit the data on behalf of the employer. I'm not going to drive that more than is necessary. I think we've done that. Now, I doubt if there's anyone who doesn't know what social distancing measures are. And some security guys, if you go into a workplace, they are very good at managing this. And it's fantastic because the act of this direction requires the employer to ensure that this is done. So the fact that your security is making it happen is very good, because it then means the employer is doing what is required when everyone plays their role. So every employer must arrange a workplace to ensure minimal contact between workers. And as far as practicable, ensure that there's a minimum of 1.5 meters between workers while they are working, for example, at their workstations. Now, why did I include this here? Because you know it. There's nothing else for me to tell you than say to you, make sure there's enough space. But why do I need to even say it? So I've included this, and there's a reason why. Let's see what that is. Depending on the circumstance of the workplace or the nature of the sector, the minimum distance may need to be greater, but reducing the number of workers present in the workplace at any time in terms of direction may assist in achieving the required social distancing that must be in place. So have a look at the nature of the sector and the circumstance of the workplace, and also everything else that you're required to have there. And that's what we'll touch on in a moment. If it is not practicable to arrange the workstations to be spaced at least 1.5 meters apart, right? The employer must arrange physical barriers to be placed between workstations or erected on workstations to form a solid physical barrier between workers while they are working. Now, don't get into a debate with anyone around this matter. Even the inspectors, if you have these things in place, you are complying with the direction. It's clear here. It tells everyone what you must do. If you don't have enough spacing and whatever, then do the following. When required, supply the employee free of charge with appropriate PPE based on whatever. Now, the PPE is free of charge, and please, 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 any mask that cannot be washed, and you cannot wash the N95 and all that kind of stuff, do not subject it to exposure to a solvent either. That is also not appreciated. That mask must be replaced. It is a cost, but it is a requirement of the manufacturer that after a certain process or after the day of wearing it, that thing gets replaced. Now, the process, whatever that process is, that might result in one wear of that mask before the employee gets another one, comply with the requirements of the manufacturer. And if you look at their documentation, as I have, it is clear in that document what the manufacturer wants you to do. So you arrange your physical barriers, you provide PPE free of charge. Every employee must ensure that social distancing measures are implemented through supervision, both in the workplace and in the common areas outside the immediate workplace, through queue control or within the workplace, such as canteens and lavatories and all that kind of stuff. So please take note of this and know that if there's a failure in this area, your systems are not working. Health and safety rep, health and safety committee, your supervisors, and this other person, what is the person called again? That one that you appoint, that one must also must make sure. But in addition to that, you have a responsibility in terms of Section 14 to ensure that you do what is required and those around you are not endangered by what you are doing. So do you see how this all comes together? Make sure that these things are happening. These measures may include dividing workforces into groups or staggering break times to avoid the concentration of workers in common areas. You want to manage people to ensure that they are not infected. You can't infect a machine. Machines can't be infected. Machines can have, or inanimate objects can have the virus present on it. Plastic, cardboard, metal can have the virus present on it, but you cannot infect it. You can infect one another, and this is why we have to manage our environment in order to contain or to ensure infection is controlled by what we are doing at the workplace. Every employer must take measures to screen workers when they report for work in order to ascertain whether they have any of the symptoms associated with COVID-19. Now, we've touched on some of the stuff, and here we touch on the NICD, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases. And again, there's a footnote number, but ignore that. You can look at it in your own time. And they give you the symptoms and everything else. So if someone is suffering from this, don't leave them at the workplace. Get them out of the workplace and monitor them while they're at home. It's not a lekker jaw. It's not a place where you've been sent to go and party and go and do shopping and all that kind of stuff, please. Make sure that you manage this thing if you're sick. It does kill. It does kill. Require workers to immediately inform the employer if they experience any of the symptoms. So there's a clause here. Some call it a subdirection or whatever. The main thing is that you understand that you could be in contravention of it if you're not doing what is required. Do the right thing. Do the right thing and do what is required of you in terms of this law. Bring this to the attention of workers so that they know it's their duty and right. Well, it's their duty, if you like, to inform you as an employer. Employers must comply with guidelines issued by the Department of Health in consultation with our department, and it goes on and on. Now, there's other goodie that they do with us still, where they check your temperature and so on. That is not a foolproof method, and I keep talking about this and I entertain this rather than getting to an argument with anyone that's holding the thing. This temperature screening, apparently the story goes that a lot of people had entered our country already with the infection without any temperature screening picking up that someone had already been sick. So we had allowed people into our country who were sick, and they then, that resulted in them infecting others around them. So temperature screening is not a foolproof method for, especially when it comes to asymptomatic people. And apparently as many as 30 to 40% of people who have the virus are asymptomatic. So a lot of the people rather, don't even show the disease through a temperature screen. Thought I'd just raise that with you so that you're aware of it. If a worker presents with COVID-19 related symptoms or advise the employer of these, the employer must not permit the worker to enter the workplace or report for work. If an employer does this, except for the condition that I'm going to give in a couple of minutes, the employer could be contravening, or not could be, will be contravening the legislation. If the work is already at work, immediately the person must be requested to leave the workplace. Isolate the worker, provide the worker with a surgical mask, and arrange for the worker to be transported to a public health facility. Again, footnote 16, in a manner that does not place other workers or members of the public at risk. either to be self-isolated or to be referred for medical examination or testing. Assess the risk of transmission. Listen to this. Disinfect the area and the worker's workstation. Undertake contact tracing and refer those workers who may be at risk for screening and take any other appropriate measures to prevent possible transmission. But already the workers would be constantly screened anyway. The screening is taking place on entry to your workplace. In fact, before you leave for work in the morning, you should be doing your own screening, and there are apps available where you can do self-screening. Place the employee on sick leave, paid sick leave in terms of Section 22 of the BCA and so on, and it goes into this. And we touched on this issue a couple of minutes ago. And the sad thing is, if there is no more leave, there is no more leave. That's the unfortunate situation in this whole thing. Take steps to ensure that the employee is not discriminated against, and if there's evidence that the worker contracted COVID-19 arising out of it in the course of employment, lodge a claim for compensation and follow the procedure. Follow the procedure if you want a successful claim to be considered. If you do not, you will not be considered, and the matter will be basically thrown back to you. If a worker has been diagnosed with COVID-19 and isolated in accordance with the DOH guidelines, Department of Health guidelines, an employer may only allow a worker to return to work. Now, I said it now several times, there is a condition, here it is, take note of it. If a worker has been diagnosed with COVID-19 and isolated in accordance with the DOH guidelines, an employer may only allow a worker to return to work without requiring vital testing. In other words, without you going to go and pay for that test again, which costs, I'm told, anything around $800 plus or minus, depending on where you're going, or if you're using those self-testing kits or whatever the case is. But if you're complying with this, then you should be right. Without requiring vital testing, if the worker has completed the mandatory 10 days of isolation, not 14 days, 10 days of isolation, either from the onset, take note here, please, the onset of the symptoms in mild cases of infection. That is where there's no requirement for hospitalization. I'm going to say it again. If a worker has been diagnosed with COVID-19 and isolated in accordance with the DOH guidelines, an employer may not only allow a worker to an employer may only allow a worker to return to work without requiring vital testing if the worker has completed the mandatory 10 days of isolation, either from the onset of the symptoms in mild cases of infection. So I'm gonna park this now. You know what is required here. Let's see what the other more serious issues are for other types of workers as well. Or in moderate to severe cases of infection, moderate to severe cases of infection requiring supplemental oxygen or hospitalization from the date of achieving clinical stability or earlier, if the worker has done a medical evaluation confirming fitness to work. So that is important, please. These are the two conditions. Let's see what it says further. If the employee ensures that personal hygiene, wearing of masks, social distancing, and cough etiquette is strictly adhered to by the worker. Cough etiquette, for those of you who still don't know, is basically coughing into the crook of your elbow and obviously into something that will not allow you to do it into the open and thereby create a situation where you are spreading the virus. If the employer ensures that personal hygiene, wearing a mask, social distancing, and cough etiquette is strictly adhered to by the worker, if the employer closely monitors the worker for symptoms on return to work, so even when they return to work, you're still monitoring them. And if the worker on return to work wears a surgical mask for 21 days from the date of diagnosis. Those are the conditions. Now, this comes directly from the Department of Health, not by the Department of Employment and Labour. They have influenced this. They have contributed to the drafting of this. You will be complying with their requirements if you comply with this. However, don't work as if you've got blinkers on, horse blinkers on. There could be anomaly situations that you might have to factor in. But take note, there are medical people involved in these issues that you can and should be trusting that they're doing the right thing. If a worker has been in contact in the workplace with another worker who has been diagnosed with COVID-19, the employer must assess that worker's exposure. We've touched on that several times, in accordance with the Department of Health's guidelines to ascertain whether the exposure carries a high or low risk of transmission between the workers. Excuse me. So you can see that you don't just take things on face value. You have to make sure you delve into it to get enough information for you to make a proper decision. If there's a low risk of exposure, the employer, now take note, if there's a low risk of exposure, the employer may permit the worker to continue working using a cloth mask, complying with standard precautions, and must monitor the worker's symptoms for 10 days from the first contact. You have more information. More information is coming through. I'm going to ask the chairperson just to talk later on when I'm finished to this issue in relation to what the Department of Trade and Industry has come up with regarding cloth masks and the standards that's required. If there's a high risk of exposure, a health worker must remain in quarantine for 7 days, or with the agreement of the worker, 5 days. Now, again, this is from the Department of Health. Don't ask me about the 7 days and 10 days and the 5 days and why you want 10 days and not the 7 days and the 10 days. I don't want to hear, I personally don't want those sort of questions, because this is what is written. If your employer says to you, if the employer asks you, are you doing well? Are you feeling better? Let's say you go to a doctor and you're feeling much better, and the doctor says you're fit to return to work after 5 days. Why should you not go back to work after 5 days? Why do you want 7 days? Why do you want 10 days? And so on. I'm subjected to the same thing. And if my doctor says go back after 5 days, I will go back after 5 days. So there will be, your doctor's not going to tell you necessarily to do something that is not right. So remember also, if I may put it to you in another way, try and also let's work together to protect our jobs and also our economy, because this particular thing has decimated the economy, with 2.2 million people apparently being without work during this time. So we have a situation, if you can go back to work in less time, then do that, please. Or we do not stand for having a situation. If you look at the Department of Employment and Labour's vision, we look at ensuring healthy and safe workplaces and workplaces that are productive. That is what our vision stands for. So we'd like you to also work with us in ensuring that is the case. All other workers must remain in quarantine for 10 days, and the employer of that worker must place the worker on sick leave in accordance with the subdirection noted there. If the worker remains asymptomatic, no further testing is required prior to return to work, except in respect of health workers returning to work in less than the 10 days. So I hope that we find ourselves on this. The fact that the Department of Health has decided on the 10, the 7, and the 5, I think that is now legislated, and it's something that we're going to stick to. We will no longer stick to the 14 days that has been presented for the reasons that I've given. Sanitizers and disinfectants, and you can see I've separated them there for you. For the purpose of this direction, the hand sanitizer must be one that is 70% alcohol. I've had a couple of questions that says, what if it's less than, what if it's not alcohol? Well, you're going to have to get something that proves that whatever else you are using is definitely going to give you the same effect as something with 70% alcohol. And it will have to go through rigorous testing, and you will have to provide the evidence to my office for you to be able to move away from this one. A surface disinfectant. Now, please, you cannot use a disinfectant on your hands. It is not recommended. Apparently, the disinfectant chemically is stronger than the hand sanitizers. So you will in fact be damaging your hands if you were to use a disinfectant. And don't go and show how brave you are. Just don't do it. Males, don't do it. I know the women will not do it. But you Okies out there, don't do it. Stick to the hand sanitizer for your hands. Do not use hand sanitizer as a disinfectant, because apparently it is not as effective. Now, the disinfectant, if you're using it on a surface, make sure that it's not on a surface that can be damaged by the disinfectant. Someone sent me a lot of photos once, and in the photos they were showing me their jacket had a whole lot of spots on it, and I'm not talking about small spots, I'm talking about big spots, big sections of their clothing that had become affected by the disinfectant. In other words, the dye had been affected by the disinfectant. So that is what is going to happen. It could damage computer equipment. It could damage other electronic equipment like keyboards if you don't use it appropriately. Use those things. Do not spray hand sanitizer on your keyboard and so on, or on other things if it's on, in the on position. Make sure that you are using something that can be used under the current conditions. Every employer must take measures to ensure that all work surfaces and equipment are disinfected before work begins, regularly during the working period and after work ends, and I referred to that earlier. All areas such as the lavatories, common areas, door handles, shared electronic equipment are regularly cleaned and disinfected. Make sure the disinfectant can be used on electronic equipment and other things, such as plastics and leather and so on. If you want to do things like that, yeah, I have no responsibility for anyone who does funny business, as I call it. Funny business on your shoulders. Disable biometric systems or make them COVID-19 proof. And I get asked, what is COVID-19 proof? What can you do that can effectively carry us through this period and going into the future? So if it requires someone to wipe it with a disinfectant every time someone uses it, then that's what you'll do. Otherwise, you might want to disconnect it so that nobody uses it. But then if you're using it as a clocking in system, you may want to look at how you're going to move forward if you're doing things to suit your situation. Every year, I'm sure that people are coming up with creative ideas to do various things at this time. The employer must ensure that, and you can see I've extracted only D and E, 5A, B, C, you can go and look at yourself. The workers interacting with the public are instructed to sanitize their hands between each interaction with a member of the public, and surfaces that workers and members of the public come into contact with are routinely cleaned and disinfected. And I've now touched on that on several occasions. If you cannot see the importance of this, then yeah, you and others around you will become infected by virtue of the surfaces that are not being adequately cleaned and so on. I've left out one, I've put in sub 2 few for the reasons underlying the DOH's requirement. Every employer must provide each of its employees free of charge with a minimum of 2 cloth masks, which comply with the recommended guidelines for fabric face masks for employees to wear while at work and while commuting to and from the work, and require any other worker to wear a face mask in the workplace. So, as I indicated earlier, the chairperson will also tell us something from the DTI on this. However, I'd just like to remind you of 2 things. The first is not all cloth fabric is the same. Some cloth fabric has a good density and will act as a partial filter, not as a foolproof filter. And other cloth fabrics, again, will not be suitable. You'll remember that the president of the USA humored us at one stage by saying that a scarf was suitable as a mask, a cloth mask, if you like, and that is not the case. Fabric can range, excuse me. Fabric mask can go from 0% efficient to about 60%. If you are lucky to get away with a great efficacy, it will be because you have added filters into the fabric mask. Otherwise, it ain't going to be, no matter what anyone says, they will then have to test it and prove it to me. So I just want to leave you with that thought. Not all cloth masks are equal, and these other things where people pull a thing over their faces, the chairperson will tell us about that story too, but I don't think that thing is so effective, and he'll tell you why. The number and replaceability of cloth masks that must be provided to an employee or required of workers must be determined in accordance with any sectoral guidelines. So the sectoral guidelines, I'll talk to you about that in a couple of minutes, and in the light of the employee or workers' conditions of work in particular, where these may result in the mask becoming wet or soiled. I've been into a fridge with a mask that had become wet due to a warm environment that I was in, and due to me sweating, the mask became wet. I went into that environment and there was no breathing taking place whatsoever. I had to get another mask. I had to replace that mask with something else in order for it to become effective again. So that is a situation that you're left with. Your risk assessment will pick it up, and you're required to take what is appropriate, not what is more cost effective for you, but what is appropriate to protect the worker, or you'll have to find another way of doing the work that will ensure the health and safety of workers going into those environments. Every employer must ensure that workers are informed, trained, instructed, and supervised How is this different from Section 8? No difference. No difference from Section 8 at all in the Act as to the correct use of cloth masks and PPE in general. So even your general safety regulations touches on this aspect that you're required to comply with. The general requirement for workers to wear masks does not derogate from the fact that where risk assessment indicates that specific PPE is required, those categories of workers must be provided with the right type of PPE. I'm going to leave it at that. This is not about the DOH only due to this public health issue. This is a health and safety, occupational health and safety issue for workers at work as well. Now, you will be required, after you've done a proper assessment of your risks, you'll then see what it is that you provide in terms of PPE that is most appropriate, and that is what you'll give to the worker in order to protect the worker. Otherwise, you go through the hierarchy of controls. Before you even give the worker the PPE, make sure that you have done everything else in terms of those controls. I want to make sure that we're not off track here just because we put DOH guidelines here. You'll stick to the principles of health and safety as is required by the Health and Safety Act and its regulations. That is not replaced by this particular document, but rather further reinforced. So again, I've given you an extract here in respect to measures in respect of workplaces to which public has access, and we've touched on this one. I've taken out two only because I wanted to drive home a point depending on what is reasonably practicable. Given the nature of the workplace contemplated in Sub 1, every employer must determine the floor area of the workspace in square meters in order to determine the number of customers and workers that may be inside the workplace at any one time with adequate space available. Assign an employee as a compliance officer to ensure that these measures are complied with and that all directions in respect of hygienic conditions and limitations of exposure to persons with COVID-19 are adhered to. So this compliance officer that I forgot a moment ago, the name of this compliance officer is a very important cog in your workplace's wheels, if you like, to keep all the wheels spinning and so on. Every employee must keep the water. Now, this is a nice one. This is a nice one. Ventilation. This is also the speciality of the chairperson. I can hold my own on this matter, but it is an area that must not be undermined or not properly considered, because it's become known as an area that can contribute to the spread of the virus. And while I'm going to tell you what is in this regulation, there are specialists in this area. My office specifically can provide you with a list of this. There are also AIAs, approved inspection authorities, that are involved in this area that can assist you and provide you with the type of information that you need. However, do not underestimate how this particular area can contribute to problems, not only in relation to this virus, but other issues related to keeping your workers healthy at the workplace. Every employer must keep the workplace well ventilated by natural or mechanical means to reduce the viral loading. Now, in this thing, having an open window is not necessarily going to give you the type of environment that you're looking for. And the reason for that is you could be allowing more carbon monoxide and so on, etc., amongst other things, to enter your workplace and thereby increase other risks to your workers, whereas you think that you're creating the right sort of environment by opening a window or windows. So that is important. Where reasonably practicable, have an effective local extraction ventilation system with what is known as HEPA filters, HEPA, otherwise known as high efficiency particulate air filters, as noted there, is technically assessed to be functioning effectively, is regularly cleaned and maintained, does not recirculate the air. Now, these are just some things that have been listed here. I haven't heard anyone argue this particular point, although there could be some things that could be added or must in fact be added here to provide further guidance, and I'll rely on you to provide me with that input. Ensure that the ventilation vents do not feed back in through open windows, of course, another danger, and then ensure that ventilation filters are cleaned and replaced in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions by a competent person. Taking your filters out and washing them, and that was not what the manufacturer wanted. In fact, the manufacturer wanted you to replace the filters to maintain its efficiencies. Could be what is required. Why are you opting to wash it and thereby possibly even reduce its effectiveness by whatever else you're going to do with those filters? So before you do your own thing, again, which could be what I call funny business, first make sure the manufacturer is on board in terms of the information they provided to you. Make sure you know what is there and that you're adhering to it. If the workers tell you that there's a problem with their breathing when you put on the air conditioner, you need to investigate it, because you could be creating an even bigger health-related risk. So let's work together on this and let's do the right thing. Every employee must check regularly on the websites noted, as well as the Department of Employment and Labour website. In terms of small businesses, you saw this referred to early on. Please take note of it. Employees with 10 employees or less must take the following measures. Now, you're not going to get away with not doing a risk assessment, in my opinion. You're not going to get away with not doing a basic plan of what you're required to do in relation to that risk assessment. So my advice to employers is to make sure that they do what is required in order to ensure that they have healthy and safe workers at the workplace. Now, that said, there's almost nothing different here. You are going to have to wash your hands. You're going to have to sanitize your hands. You're going to disinfect the workplace. You're going to make such arrangements as you are required to in order to ensure that you have a healthy and safe workplace. So all those things are here. There's one thing I'd like to draw your attention to, which I don't agree with in the direction and which is not going to assist you. This will not assist you. Under D, immediately contact the relevant provincial inspectorate for instruction and direct the employee to act in accordance with those instructions. That is not the job of the inspector. The inspector also will not have that kind of time. You are to make sure that whatever you as an employer instruct the employee to do, which is your job as an employer, that they do it. And in terms of section 14, it says that when an employer instructs an employee to do something, the employee, if that is obviously a legal instruction, is then to ensure that they carry out all those lawful instructions of the employer. There's no option. There's no, I don't feel like doing it. If it's a legal and lawful order or instruction, the employee must carry out that instruction of the employer. That makes D or sub D redundant. Do not request the inspector to do this because they're not going to. Provide cloth masks or require an employee to wear some form of cloth covering over their mouth and nose while at work. I just want to leave that with you quickly. I just want to come back to the other thing. Please, the inspector's also not going to advise you because they don't know what your risk assessment says or what's in your workplace and so on. So D becomes a conflict, a point of conflict rather than assisting you. Provide cloth masks or require an employee to wear some form of cloth covering. Now that some form of cloth covering, which I put in red, was to emphasize it, as I have done now several times, not some form of cloth covering, please, 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 please. Make sure that it's something that offers you decent protection and make sure that you're aware of what is not giving you protection, please. Provide cloth masks or require an employee to wear over their mouth and nose while at work. Now, another question that was in the question and answer section, I think, if I'm not mistaken, dealt with this one where if I'm in an office, yes, it was a question, yes. If I'm in an office with other people and there's an air conditioner going, am I still required to wear a mask? Even if if the door's open, if there's windows open, and then when you get up and you leave the office, you are required to wear the mask. Well, here, it is quite clear what this is saying, and you do your own assessment, and you say, you know what, I'm not feeling very safe in this environment. I prefer, if I'm working with others, to wear the mask. Then you wear the mask. If you do your risk assessment and you think that you could become infected in some way, wear the mask. Sanitize, disinfect. If you are touching on the same things your colleagues are touching on, disinfect. If they are not disinfecting, at least you disinfect and sanitize during the course of your work day. Don't wait. Some things you don't require me to tell you. Some things go with your instinct. If you do not feel good about it, go with your instinct. And I'm not saying if you don't feel good about wearing the mask, take it off. No. I'm talking about when it comes to doing the right thing for yourself and for those around you, do it. So if you're going to, in your environment, there's a chance of you contracting the virus, yes, wear the mask, disinfect, sanitize. Okay, that's the rule. Provide each employee with sanitized soap and clean water to wash their hands with disinfectant and so on. And we touched on this, and I said to you, nothing has changed. And here you can see there's also discussion about the risk assessment. Again, very crucial. Don't skim over doing your risk assessment. Ask those who know. Approach Saiosh and do a risk assessment workshop. And do a proper risk assessment within your work environment, because failure to do that could be the difference between life and death under the current COVID situation or any other pandemic that might strike us. Worker obligations, in addition to the obligations of the employees under OSHA, I've said to you now several times, the employee still has an obligation in terms of Section 14 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Do not undermine this. Do not think this is a light-hearted thing. You have an obligation, and you too can be charged for failing to comply with a section or regulation of the Act and its regulations, which includes incorporated standards. I want to get on to the last one, which is quite last big one, which is quite an important one. The rest are smaller than this, and that is the refusal to work due to exposure to to COVID-19. Now, you'll remember we touched on it earlier. We just touched on it. Well, here's the detail that you need to be cognizant of. Excuse me. Please take note, that's not a COVID cough. Yeah. So this refusal to work is quite an important thing. Now, I have to say to you, I'm not aware of any workers who have left the workplace due to an unsafe or unhealthy, if you like, work environment. I have yet to hear of some, and when I asked organized labor about this, they couldn't respond to it for whatever reason. This says basically, if you're following, and this is what I want you to take note of, that there's a process involved. There's a process involved. There must be, we saw earlier, one of the requirements on an employee is that there must be a procedure in place. Procedure in place. That must be there. Failure to have a procedure for this is tantamount to a contravention of the legislation, and you could be served with a notice for that. An employee may refuse to perform any work if circumstances arise with reasonable justification, which with reasonable justification appear to that employee or to a health and safety rep to pose an imminent and serious risk to their exposure to COVID-19. Remember all the things we spoke about, high risk, moderate risk, low risk, and all that? Well, here we go. If you've allowed someone into the workplace and you are constantly allowing workers to come back when they are still not fully recovered, that is a situation that employees can say this poses a risk, an imminent and serious risk of exposure to COVID-19 for your other workers. So please take note, procedure, and here we go into it. An employee who has refused to perform work in terms of subdirection 1, and I've put it in bold for you, must, as soon as is reasonably practicable, notify the employer, either personally or through a health and safety rep, of the refusal and now I'm getting excited now. Of the refusal and the reason for the refusal. The reason for the refusal. And you'll see why. Every employer must, that has been notified in terms of this paragraph, must, after consultation with the compliance officer and the health and safety committee, or if there's no committee, a health and safety representative, endeavor to resolve any issue that may arise from the exercise of the right in terms of subdirection 1. So this must not be taken lightly, as it can have an impact on your business operations, especially where you are running 24-hour business operations. This will have an impact on your operations totally. Comply with any notice served within said time frame or an appeal, and I put that in as a note. You won't find that as a heading there. If the matter cannot be resolved internally, notify an inspector of the issue within 24 hours and advise the employee and all other parties involved in resolving the issue that an inspector has been notified. Now, when we were discussing this matter, we couldn't come to a resolution that was acceptable to all parties. If you recall the second direction, this was not there. And there's one or two other items also that has been changed, especially when it comes to the CCMA. So this is a major change. If the workplace is unsafe, the employer will notify the inspector, and take note of this, please. Within 24 hours of the employer becoming aware, the employer will notify the inspector. So the inspector is not going to be there within 24 hours. I'm saying that the inspector will be there within 48 hours at least, because their work is planned ahead of time. So in a high-risk situation, or in a situation where there's the possibility of closure of a business, which is taken seriously, or part of a business. Take note, it could be part of a business or it could be the whole business. Then you are talking about a serious issue here. Then the inspector is going to have to go out as soon as possible. And the inspector, on coming to a decision, will decide whether or not the business or part of the business must be closed by serving a prohibition notice. Now, the inspector could serve any other notice, depending on what he or she finds at the workplace. If they find something that is an immediate danger, they're going to serve the prohibition notice. If not, they're going to serve a contravention or an improvement notice, which will allow the employer time to comply, but it will be explained to both the employer, the health and safety reps, and also the worker representatives that will be present as well. Because whenever we do inspections, there must be worker representatives, 2 of them, and health and safety rep for the relevant area is included in the inspection, and their names are recorded in the reports. So the inspector will go out. If it's unsafe, close off. If not, they will then allow the employer and the workers to continue. Now, if, as happened to one of our senior provincial chief inspectors, the workers or the employer decides to threaten the inspectors or the provincial chief inspector, or even myself, because I go out and accompany the inspectors on inspections, you could find that we will definitely immediately lodge a case with the SAPS, and this matter will then go to court, and we will not withdraw the matter. The matter will go all the way, and we will force that issue. So this is quite a serious thing. If you do that, it will become a criminal offense, and you will have a record. We will not allow the matter to fall flat. And comply with any prohibition notice issued by an inspector, but I've extended this. It could be more than just a prohibition notice, depending on what the inspector finds there. If the inspector disagrees that the environment is not as high risk as anticipated, then that will be communicated and the appropriate notice served. If there's nothing, the inspector is not going to serve a notice and will inform all the parties accordingly of that decision, and then leave without having served the notice. Subdirection 1 applies whether or not the person refusing to work has used or exhausted any other applicable external or internal procedure. No person may benefit from or promise any benefit to any person for not exercising his or her right in terms of the subdirection. No person may threaten to take any action against a person because that person has exercised or intends to exercise their right. Now, this one is obviously similar to the acts victimization issue, and this issue will be taken up very, very seriously. No employee may be dismissed, disciplined, prejudiced, or harassed for refusing to perform any work as contemplated. If there's a dispute then as to whether the subdirection has been contravened, the employee may refer the dispute to the CCMA for an accredited bargaining council for conciliation and arbitration. Now, I want to draw two things here in this thing to your attention. The first is the health and safety matter will play itself out. The decisions will be made, the outcome will be clear, and the thing will play itself out. The second part of this issue is the dispute that could be lodged at the CCMA, which will play itself out in its own time frames. If you look at the second direction, you'll see that there were time frames there, and it was deemed to be unacceptable, and so on. So in this particular case, the CCMA came and they said, no, you cannot put a time frame to the CCMA. We are not able to work within that due to the workload. And imagine if a case comes in that should be put on case number 100, you now put it as case number 1, and it has now flown past all the others that have been there for some time. So just be aware of that dynamic and the fact that this is what was agreed to by all parties. If the arbitrator appointed as contemplated in that finds that the employer has contravened the subdirection to the arbitrator may make any appropriate order. So just be aware of that, the outcome. And then we've already touched on deductions. You already know that that which you are obliged to provide, you cannot charge for it in terms of health and safety. Monitoring and enforcement of the directions. Here's an interesting change in this one that you need to be aware of. And I'm going to tell you two things on this one. In the new one, this appears, it does not appear in the previous ones. To the extent that this direction gives effect to OSHA, the Minister of Employment and Labour may authorize the local authorities, the enforcement agencies maybe, to perform certain inspectorate functions in terms of 42.3. That is section 42.3 of OSHA, which says that the minister can make such regulations that has an effect of bringing on board the local authorities and so on. So this has not happened. If it does happen, you'll be informed. We'll make a big media thing of it. You need to be aware of this involvement of the local authorities. However, nothing to date has happened, and if it does, there will be a memorandum of understanding involved. Someone said local authorities, and they said, oh my word, we had the local authorities involved in this area, and in that area there was something like 90 people that that rocked up to do an inspection. 90 people thereabouts rocked up for the session or the inspection as part of the local authorities enforcement. So they said, we hope this is not going to happen with this if you do allow it to happen. So obviously we'll monitor and manage this thing strictly if we do go into it. But for now, there's nothing in place. So do not allow anyone to pitch up at your workplace, say they're from the local authority. We have not done it yet. If a person fails to comply, I'm not going to go into that. You know the rules. The inspectors are authorized. They are required to have a card with them that gives them the authority to do an inspection at your workplace. And if you're not sure of it, you can contact your local provincial chief inspectors or the OHS specialist, and they will then inform you. The details on the Department of Employment and Labour's website, and their website is www.labour.gov.za. You can get the numbers there. I've ensured that it's there for your purpose, and you can, if you don't come right there, send me a message and I will send you a message on to the province to assist you. Again, another thing that you're aware of, if there is a contravention, it's done in terms of Section 38, unless it's a regulation, then the regulations, offences and penalties will apply. I'm not going to do that one. Sectoral or industry associations, I touched on that earlier. There are sectoral guidelines. I said I'll just mention that now. The sectoral guidelines that are out, and we'll refine them. The first one is the construction one, which came out, and the second one is the chemical industry one. And I'll tell you further about what you can do if you want one in a moment. So those are the only two that are out currently. And as indicated earlier, they are there to support the direction. Insofar as any contravention of these directions constitutes a contravention of obligation or prohibition under OSHA, the offences and penalties provided for in Section 38 of OSHA apply. An inspector may, for the purpose of promoting and monitoring and enforcing compliance with OSHA, advise employers and employees of their rights and obligations and so on. Now, the sectoral guideline, you can go over, I've said to you what is out currently. I think what is important here is for you to take note of the following. On this one, I've gone back to it, but you need to be aware of it. Sectoral or industry associations, sectoral or industry associations must, in the event of high health risks, develop sector-specific health protocols in consultation with the Department of Health to limit the spread of COVID-19 in the sector, including providing for those circumstances where a firm within the sector cannot stagger working hours, provide for transport, etc., etc. Now, I need you to have a look at the whole picture here. So you've done that, you've developed something. The Department of Health has considered it as well, and if you need contacts, I can provide you with that. However, they are sitting on NEDLAG, so what NEDLAG will do is NEDLAG will give it to the Department of Health and get it back from them as well. The Chief Inspector, that is myself, appointed, whatever, must facilitate the development of sector-specific guidelines to supplement the direction by engaging with the social partners through the offices of NEDLAG. Now, what I do is, if you were to send me something, I'd send it to NEDLAG. After obviously looking at it, you must make sure that the minimum requirements as attached in Annex B is included in the guideline that you draft. You cannot go and draft something that you've thumbsucked. It must have the relevant information included in the document. You'll send it to me, for example, I'll send it off to NEDLAG and ask NEDLAG to consider it. They'll then ask the partners to come together in a meeting, what will provide them with it in order to look at it. They'll provide their comments and we'll then update that thing. That is more or less how it will work. So if you do have one, my suggestion is that you look at following the process for it. A very important addition, very, very, very important, amendment of footnotes and annexures and so on. The Minister may from time to time amend the footnotes and Annexure A and publish the amendments online without issuing an amended direction in order to update the links to any new applicable guideline or recommendation. This is new. Been added in case changes are required, and I'm bringing that to your attention that you'll find on the Department of Labour, Employment and Labour's website There'll be changes there on their Facebook, on all their social pages, Twitter, and so on and so on. They'll put the changes to bring it to your attention, and also we'll find other ways, like, for example, giving it to Saiosh to share it with its members so that you can be informed of the changes, and other bodies as well. So this is quite an important addition for you to be cognizant of, and for you to take note that those changes effectively will become law and you'll be required to comply with it. So it's vital that you make sure you are up to date. I still find people referring to the first direction, referring to the second direction, referring to outdated stuff that's long gone, that is no longer applicable. Those things, if the inspector comes round and you're not on the third direction, then you will be in contravention of the legislation that has been published for you to comply with. Like something that must be done within 21 days. If you don't even know of it, you're in contravention already. As this thing is becoming public knowledge and so on. So very important. The previous one, why it is no longer effective. It has been withdrawn, and this direction 19 says to you it is no longer effective. It is withdrawn, and you no longer need to comply with this one. These directions come into effect on the date of publication. So it was published in a gazette on the 1st of October, and from the 1st of October, you were required now to start implementing whatever is in the document. So implementation has already started, and you are required to make sure you comply. Otherwise, you need to obviously do whatever needs to be done. On the statistics front, information up until the 14th of September, I've only included the general compliance sector here because I'm not sure if the government sector is here, but the general compliance sector in the general area, we did many more inspections now, probably more than 6,000 only in this sector. Remember, that was only for 176 inspectors. And of that 176, there are vacancies, and not all inspectors are out at the same time as well. But they've been operating since the 27th of March. Compliance level was 3,158 in the general sector, non-compliance 2,248. The contravention notices were 1,703, improvements 583, prohibitions together with the government sector stands at about 600 or just over 600. It's much more now, of course, but for the general sector, it was 438. Now, here's a table that I put together. In that table, you'll see the compliance for various sectors, and the specific sectors that I want to draw your attention to at the bottom here. Right? At the bottom, there's 2,000 and some odd inspections that were done in the wholesale and retail sector. Of that, I can't see on this slide that I'm on, but you get a fair idea from what you can see. The retail and wholesale sector, we've done most of our inspections there. About 50% of all inspections were done there, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, thereabouts, you can do the calculation on your own. The construction sector, 363 inspections, 265 complied. Remember, there's also a guideline for that sector. And the agricultural sector, there were 304 inspections and 183 of them complied. And then the manufacturing sector, which is second after the wholesale and retail sector at 446, 222 inspections were compliant. That is just under half, it would appear. And yeah, that would be a worry in that sector if there were only so many that were complying. And then we go to the next one. 21% of all inspections were done in the government sector, 79% in the general sector. Compliance in the general sector stood at 58%. Most inspections in the general sector were in the wholesale sector, as I indicated. There's a 62% there. We had done 70%. But it goes down to 49% when we include the inspections in the government sector as well. So with the government sector there, you can see it drops substantially. Compliance rate for the retail sector is the same as the overall compliance rate for the general sector at 58%. This is only about 3% above the overall country compliance rate, which stands at 55% on the 14th of September. I can't tell you how concerned I am at this. This leaves me very worried that we haven't moved. Employers are not coming to the party. It's clear that somebody is not with me at this party. And I'm not quite sure how we're going to deal with it, except for prosecutions. But prosecutions don't necessarily have the same value of changing the culture at the workplace. That is my concern. Everything after the prosecution is not going to move off or change. Not necessarily. I saw a radical change in someone who owned a company when 3 workers died as a result of an incident at that company. I saw a radical change from that time on. It's probably only one of the most radical changes I've seen of someone in relation to complying, so much so that that person is changing what is happening in a whole sector that he or she is working in. So you get that, but you get that as the anomaly more than the norm. So how do we change things? An accident, a prosecution, how do we get the change we want? A change in culture is where the issue lies. What is the solution? What is the solution? Now, if it is true that we are about to enter the second wave of COVID-19, can we afford not to be compliant totally? Can we afford not to be compliant? There's been a proliferation of information. Everyone was talking about this. There should be more than enough PPE. So the problem we had at the beginning is gone. Shouldn't be there. Forget about quality for a moment. That is a subject we'll touch on again. Quality, to what extent do we have quality, and so on and so on and so on. Let's distinguish between workplace and the community, public health versus occupational health and safety. Department of Health, which provides overall guidance and public health guidance, versus the occupational health and safety side, where we get involved, but we also partner with the Department of Health in this and the entities. The National Institute for Occupational Health and the National Institute for Communicable Diseases as the second entity. So I'm saying to you, let's distinguish between workplace and community aspects. Even in this direction, it says a cloth mask or any other material covering. Hello, there's a problem. Not all cloth masks are equal. So I'm at the end of the presentation. There is a new danger, of course. We are becoming complacent and we are dropping our guard. Why? Because it has not yet affected us in any way directly. I believe with a lot of people, this appears to be the challenge. Why else will we be becoming complacent? Think about it for a moment. This time round, will you be the one? Because you have become complacent and you've dropped your guard. COVID can be beaten, as I've said the last time. Let's spread the message, not the virus. We can beat it. Are you spreading? Or are you playing at this old game? Again, as I've said the last time, what is your takeaway from this message? This is not about pointing a finger. We are in this together. Make a change together. Mr. Norkia, thank you very much for the opportunity. I would like to really thank you. This was something that I value. As usual, you allowing us access to both your members and this facility is most appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Norkia.
Mr. Zano, thank you very much to you for a comprehensive 154-minute presentation. Wow, what can I say? First of all, for your time, and secondly, for the comprehensive presentation. One would believe and think that there shouldn't be any questions. To the contrary, with a full Zoom house of 500 attendees and over 300 also watching live on YouTube, and also some of those questions being fielded here, we have, as I mentioned, appointed Sean Chester as chairperson of the Q&A. Sean, thank you for this and thank you for your time. Sean is a chartered member of Saiosh. He's also a registered occupational hygienist. I could see the smoke coming out of Sean's panelist link there, because it is a massive task. I mean, there was questions, I think, in excess of 300. We also cannot now spend another 3 hours on questions, unfortunately. So, Sean, you've got a massive task to first of all prioritize those questions, relevant questions. And if I can maybe appeal and ask to both Sean and to the Chief Inspector, if it's a question that warrants a straightforward yes, no answer, please do that, because it's impossible to elaborate on all the questions. We still got over 450 members, or rather attendees, on site, so there's anticipation for the questions, and over 200 still on our YouTube live channel. So, Sean, thank you. I'm handing over to you to facilitate the questions, and I know Tibor's been over 150 minutes at it already, so please can we try and consolidate them and get to the answers as soon as possible. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Over to you, Sean. Thank you, Niels.
Tibor, wow, I mean, you must be exhausted. You're sitting in your workplace, which is actually at home at the moment. I've got a stiff neck. I've got some stuff going on in my shoulders. So well done. I mean, that was a hell of a thing. You covered everything really excellently, and I highly appreciate that. I suppose just want to ask you, maybe just before we even start talking about this culture change and how we can go about doing that, you've got these 500 new inspectors coming in. And part of that, I recognize, is that there's going to be a lot more sort of notices being generated and a lot more sort of non-compliant issues coming with. So there'll be this massive increase in those statistics as well. But I think for me, when I look at the stuff that Saiosh has been doing, and NIO and SIO, all putting a lot of these webinars and these presentations together, and I really, again, I thank you for actually coming and making the time to come and do this. But with this collective of this information, there's really no reason for people not to be complying, and there's actually, as you say, enough PPE, enough information out there for guys to do it. So yeah. Well done. So yeah, there was over 100 questions, and I tried to answer as many of them as I possibly could, and I do apologize for some of the curt responses that I gave all the way through. I guess I think the thing that you said, and I think was really, really evident, and I would like you to expand on it, is actually this ability for people to go in and actually self-assess themselves. We all know enough now. There's a hell of a lot of information out there, whether it's ventilation, whether it's use of masks, whether it's use of sanitizer, and that you impressed upon that. Would you like to just expand on why you believe that the self-assessment is such an important part of the whole thing?
Thank you very much, Sean. I think the key thing around this virus is before anyone else becomes infected, manage what you can within your own time. I think the only challenge is a workplace-related issue, where if the worker is not someone who's reliable and so on, you might find out that the employer is not easily going to trust that worker who goes off. And these are some of the questions I've been having over time. So self-assessment, I think they've whittled it down to the important questions that if I have a problem here, I must most likely have it. And Department of Health themselves are involved in it. Now, they have developed an app that will assist in this. So it should be a trusted device. Now, the employer is going to get involved in this, as you've seen. That is the addition. The employer is going to have to tell the Department of Health through the NIH about positive workers and all that kind of stuff. So I think self-assessment becomes a vital tool given the load on the employers as well. If a worker gets to the workplace, let's say they're first going to hop into public transport, they're going to possibly infect others. If they get to the workplace, they're going to infect others. At that stage, we are defeating the real reason why we are trying to put these other processes in place to manage it from the time that you wake up to the time that you go to sleep at night. In short, Sean, I hope that covers the aspect.
Yeah, and I think you get this, and a lot of questions around the sort of workplace acquired COVID. But if you've got your protocols in place, there shouldn't be any workplace acquired COVID, and all of it should be a community acquired. Certainly in the businesses that we're seeing, where the guys got the ISO systems and everything like that, they've got risk officers and that in place. The case that you're getting are really actually community acquired. It's actually getting to work or whatever they're doing on the weekends and everything like that. So there was a lot of questions around that. And yeah, so I think what would you say to somebody if they said to you, look here, I've got a person that's got comorbidities. I want them to come work, but I can't guarantee that they're safe. And if they just sign, and that person's got comorbidities, actually says to the employer, look here, I'll sign an indemnity to come into, because I need to get to work. But and what would you say to somebody that's actually got that situation? Because that came up a few times as well.
Yeah, I think in the previous one we did it, this was a similar question, and I think it is a challenge. Now, nobody, not even myself, I cannot tell someone to forsake all their rights in terms of health and safety. I do not have that right. So if you do sign off an indemnity, be aware of the following. The indemnity might cover you in terms of civil law, but it will definitely not cover you in terms of criminal law. So we go in and we do the investigation. You could possibly come away with a culpable homicide issue if it's found that you were in fact, and we prove it, that you were in fact guilty as an employer. You as an employee can't even sign away your rights in terms of Section 14. So I think anyone that is forcing someone to go to work, knowing full well that the risk for them is at an elevated level, takes upon them a responsibility that they won't be able to face from a human point or perspective. So look, the comorbidity issue has to be managed. That's why the process has been put in place. It's a worldwide phenomenon where it's been accepted that people with comorbidities, and let's put this into categories. there are categories of people suffering from comorbidities that are at an even higher risk than those with other categories of comorbidities. So when we mention comorbidity, Sean, I think employers could be under the false impression as well that all comorbidities are equal. And the moment you start hitting the 60 plus, although the 50 plus, the category you're in, Sean, I mean me, that I'm in, is at an elevated risk. It's been found. We are in an elevated risk category. Yet, if an employer is ignoring that, they're putting those workers at a risk level that is probably unacceptable, and it could backfire.
And again, it goes back into self-assessments, and it also goes back into the protocols are well known now. We understand that barriers, good ventilation, PPE, separation, isolation, dedensification, all those aspects and all those hard things. You should be able to take a vulnerable worker, or let's just say a comorbid person, and actually find them work. If they're important to your organization, there's no reason why they can either not work from home, or they can actually be placed in an area that's actually got all these other sort of systems in place. So thank you for that, Tibor.
Yeah, Sean, can I emphasize what you're raising? If the employer can ensure that that worker is working as safe as a person, a person without those issues, as safe as possible, then I don't think that there would be a problem with that. But that is where I'm finding there are problems. So I just want to say I agree with what you've said there, and just emphasize employers need to factor in that. If they cannot create that environment, then no.
Tibor, I'm sure it's a short answer to this one. It came up often, but we are sitting in a Saiosh forum over here. So can a safety officer be a compliance officer?
Sean, if we look at what is the objective to be achieved, and that safety officer is reporting to the right level and have the necessary support of everyone, in some business environments, no problem. But otherwise, I would look at a very senior manager here fulfilling that obligation, which incidentally, I do know it would be a challenge on its own. But the very short side of it is, yes, they could, but I've already seen where such a person is a junior person and they don't have the right sort of understanding for health and safety issues, let alone COVID coming into the fray, then my answer is going to be no. So the evaluation of who you put in that place must be someone that's very strong with the right support structure and so on.
Yeah, and I guess safety officers are generally facilitators of safety and health and environment within an organization, whereas a manager is somebody that actually has proper clout to affect change by order, I suppose. It's an executive function. Yeah. A lot of this came up as well, is that if I've got if I've got a workplace that's more than 50 employees, they're spread all over the place. So I know you emphasized in a workplace. Do I still have to submit my data, my screening data, and my health data to the NIOH and all that?
Sean, just say that again. Sorry.
I'm just saying, if I've got a workplace and there's more than 50 people in this workplace, but they spread over various sites, do I still have to submit the data to the NIOH, the screening data, and all the other submissions?
No, this one came up as an argument, and they've decided to opt for 50 at the workplace. Okay, so in short, 50 at the workplace.
Okay, so
more than 50 at that workplace.
Yes, so
where you are now, Sean, if you had more than 50 there, then you would have to report.
Okay. And then just you were talking a lot about the cloth masks. I know that the DTRC, I think it was a day or two, released the new guidelines on the use of fabric masks, and those do relate directly to they specifically relate to valve masks, but they are not encouraged. They're not recommended. I'd say prohibited should be a good word for it. So a valve mask, if you're wearing a valve mask, your exhalation comes out of the mask, and it is obviously spread. Those droplets are spread by force to be on there. So the mask is actually then not protecting the person that you are in contact with. And then they also came out very strongly with the use of buffs. Buffs are also now not recommended. So I'm going to say / prohibited. And I think we need to watch this space, because if a workplace, I would think, actually starts using and continues using these sorts of masks, and you see them around and you start getting cases in that, I'm sure the inspectorate is going to start coming up and saying, whoa, hold on a second, you not take reasonable precautions. There's not a mask problem anymore. There is good 3-layered masks around. There is surgical masks. So there's actually no reason for people not to comply. So they came up a few times as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so all screening data at this point needs to be submitted, Tibor, not just data of somebody that's got a elevated, or say a cough or a sore throat or anything like that. Is that correct?
No, I think there are two parts to that. The one is that there's an initial report, and that affects everyone. And then after that, those people that fall into those categories 2 to 5, Roman numerals 2 to 5, they must be reported on weekly by the Tuesday for the previous week's data. And if they don't adhere to that again, it would be a problem. But the time frames, the type of information, because industry and employer-specific default, they could not submit everything. The discussion around this at NEDLAG was if the Department of Health, together with other law enforcement agencies such as the Department of Employment and Labor, under the compensation fund as well, if they were to take effective action, provide important information to its clients and to various partners, then it would need to know where those problem areas are. Now, if we go for the second wave, and let's say for argument's sake, Boksburg becomes a problem, then we can take all our inspectors, put them into Boksburg, go to all the employers and start a drive there in order to lessen the impact before it becomes a major full-blown issue in Boksburg, just as an example. So what the Department of Health is hoping to achieve by getting that information is it's hoping to direct its strategies to the affected areas in the shortest time possible.
All right, thanks for that.
From daily to weekly and so on and so on. I'm just giving you a bit of the context.
No, that's exactly what we need, because it really helps a lot when we get it. I had a few people saying that they've been issued notices by the inspectors for not doing temperature checks. What would you say to those people? By the department.
Appeal to me. Send your appeal to me.
There you have it, folks, from the chief inspector himself.
I will make a note and I'll raise this issue of temperature screening, but it's not a requirement.
Then Tibor, there's been, I think, I wish I could get Randall Lazagang to come on and actually ask the question directly, but around the high exposure employee or incidents where the person actually then goes into quarantine for 10 days thereafter. Is that high exposure, I would assume, is actually somebody that's been exposed directly to somebody with COVID-19, and that exposure was considered high exposure within close quarters, right?
Absolutely. I think the example that the Department of Health gives is that you're spending 20 minutes plus without a mask, any mask, in less than 1.5 meters in that person's presence, an infected person, and you now have you stand a very, very good chance of becoming infected in such a situation. So they give it 1.5 meters, roughly 20 minutes without a mask. Then you stand a very good chance of being a high risk.
And then, yeah, Tibor, and I go back to that self-assessment thing. I think it's such an important point that you raised there, and the reasons behind all this. All these protocols are there to protect you from even these sorts of situations. You should never have a situation where you have a high risk exposure. I know certainly when I look at the way that we do the business is that there's no such thing that any person getting a positive case would ever relate to a single other employee inside the organization. And that really is the critical thing, and it's completely achievable in most cases.
Absolutely.
Then there's been a few questions around doctors being able to sort of adjust the quarantine times, and you've actually covered that, so I don't think we have to ask again on that. But what happens if a doctor says that you must be off for 14 days, but you know the direction says 10 days? I would imagine it's all about how serious your symptoms were, I suppose.
Yeah, that is why I raised the issue around anomaly situations. We mustn't treat one case the same as every other case. It could affect you differently to me, Sean. So if all I'm begging people to do is, if you're feeling better and the doctor says go back, I'm not asking you to go against your doctor's instructions. That's not what I'm doing. I'll never do that. But once you're feeling better and you've been told, listen, you can go back now, go back. Doctor would know. But if you're not feeling better and you feel you want to get a second opinion, go get that second opinion. Obviously, there's a lot more at stake than just you and your health and safety. So it's one of those things that doctors will claim the territory immediately if you say anything differently. Unless you're a medical person, you're going to have a problem. So health has indicated 10 days. If you feel that you're not better after that 10 days, go back to your doctor and let your doctor then give an indication. But it must be clear, Sean, here's the problem for a number of workers. They'll phone me and say, I've used up all my leave and my employer doesn't want to pay me. I'm told that I'm not right, or I don't feel right now. There's nothing I can do about that. That becomes a BCA issue and everything else. And if the employer says to you at that stage, listen, you're fired, I cannot give that kind of permission or authority. The moment the health and safety matters taken out of my hands, and you know that we look at the hygiene aspects and so on, Sean, the medical side is considered by the medical personnel. So that is why some issues I say, go to the Department of Health and get them to indicate on some of the issues. But as far as leave and all that stuff is concerned, I'm not about to, because it's not within my area of responsibility. And if the employer does fire you, you're now going to go to the CCMA, and I will never go contrary to what you, Sean, need to make a decision whether or not you're going to go back to work. I cannot tell you go back to work or don't go back to work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that's where doctors also come in, and they will start prescribing people to not wear a mask. They say this person, for some reason, maybe eczema on the face or some kind of problems with their ear loops or whatever it is. And you just have to box clever. You have to make sure that you can navigate via your risk assessments, and you have to look at all those sort of, I like that word, anomalies, and actually get them to sort of navigate that through. And I think the thing that you've emphasized all the way through is just make sure you're working off a platform of informed, competent risk assessments at all times. And then with that in place, there should never be a reason for all these issues, because you've actually got your barriers, you've actually got your de-densification, you've got your ventilation, you've got all those sorts of things. And if you've got that in place, there shouldn't be issues, right? So I think that's the end of the questions, Thibaut. I am going to end there because the session has unfortunately gone on very long. But wow, thank you so much. I just got one little point that I just want to make. It was David Jones, just said in the direction on page 7, there's a referral to the OHS direction for NIO, and there's a website. The website reference on there, and it actually says HTTP, then // It needs to be HTTPS. It needs to have that S in it, otherwise it will not take you to the NIOSH website. So if everybody can just take that and actually make sure that they use the S inside that as well, and then they will get through. But Thibaut, from our part, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure as always. And yeah, really good to see you again, and thank you very much.
Sean, thank you very much. I do appreciate having spent some time with you now, and I think let's make some time to see each other. Not over Saiosh.
Thank you, Sean and Thibault. Just hang on a second, just for the closing of this webinar as well. I'm going to sneak a question in here to the Chief Inspector, which came directly from our in-house appointed advocate. I think you know him very well, Advocate Reinhard Luch. Question comment is as follows: surely an employee who refuses to reveal their comorbidities is a contravention of Section 13 of this new direction. And for that matter, of fact, the Section 14 as well. And this could have consequences on that employee.
Mr. Nokia, I think you raise an important thing, and I haven't stepped off this issue. That, in fact, my response last night to a client was that this can have all kinds of ramifications, from insurance, medical, lawsuits. I agree, but the point here is, if someone doesn't reveal something, there's nothing, you're not even going to know about it. So unless you know something about it, you can indicate that this is a, that it's a contravention. That's why I went as far as explaining about the POPI Act and the requirement that everything as far as possible must be explained why. It will be a contravention of Section 14 if you endanger the life of someone else as well. And in terms of the Act, it's even more serious, the contravention, because it's an act and not a regulation. So it becomes a big issue, and I do agree with Advocate Luch on this matter. But when I was thinking about a response to this thing, I thought, you know what, unless I tell my employer that I'm sick or I've got this, and I provide evidence, because in the case of my employer, they wanted evidence, I had to provide the evidence in order to, so I went to my doctor, and my doctor indicated why I'm considered, under that category. So if I didn't do that, the employer would be none the wiser to the matter, and that's where the challenge comes in.
Thank you for that comment, Thibault. Just before I close, a quick reminder to all our Saiosh members that this webinar is CPD verified by Saiosh with 2 CPD points. In fact, looking at the content and the duration, it should actually be a little bit more, I would say, but it's been verified for 2 CPD points, and you can go and claim the points on your professional profile on the Saiosh website. Also a reminder to everyone that took part today that this actual webinar was recorded, it's still being recorded. It was also live on our YouTube page. So it becomes a library of information that will be added to our webinar list on our website. Members will also receive the direct link by tomorrow or to the recording as well as to the presentation. Thank you again to everyone, Gareth in the back end, for making sure that this was once again a professional and smooth webinar presentation. Thank you to Thibault for your time, really appreciate it, to give it to our members. I don't think I've seen any webinar of this size and magnitude related to the directions, which makes us quite proud, Saiosh, for your commitment as an honorary member of Saiosh in any case.
Of course.
Really appreciate it, and I'm sure if there's any changes and other aspects, we can call on you, and you will always be available to do further presentations. Thank you, sir. And also, Sean, thank you to you for taking over 100 questions and combine them into 2 or 3 questions with answers to that. I think it captured everything very nicely. To all of you that partake today, thank you very much. Have a safe rest of the week, and cheers for now.